Like, for everyone here, what do we think of when we think of burnout? How do we feel? Good, shout them out, yeah.
Like staring at my notes, not knowing what to write.
Yes, perfect. Writer's block, yes. In the back, nope. Yeah, not interested in doing things that we love, not getting that same enjoyment that we got out of our hobbies, yes. Mm-hmm. Having lots of ideas, but not the motivation to enact them. These are all great, great points. I would say for me as well, just that feeling, that kind of gut feeling of like, oh, it's 2 hours before my session, I've done nothing. I see some head shaking. I think we've been there. I also just wanted to get a gauge of the room. Are most people coming at this from the angle of being a DM? You know, feel free to raise your hand if you want. Cool. Okay. Seems like a lot of us are looking at this more from the DM angle. Do we have any players here who are maybe feeling that? Okay, great. Yeah, totally. DM burnout is not the only kind of burnout, obviously. It is easy as a player, too, to get caught up in the ideas that you set forth when you were making your character, especially for a longer campaign. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I'm looking at a more sort of general definition of burnout. This is from Psychology Today in 2022. Burnout is a feeling of cynicism, irritability, or anger caused by an extended period of stress. Burnout most often occurs when we are not in control of how a job is carried out. I will let everybody draw their own conclusions there. When the amount of work required for a job is disproportionate to the payoff, or when personal boundaries are violated in the course of a job. Signs of burnout include feelings of resentment, a sense of dread about work, reduced feeling of reward or enjoyment. Hey, we were just talking about all of those. And it can ultimately lead to mental and physical symptoms, including headache, fatigue, or seeking out numbing behaviors. And burnout is not isolated to any one profession. It's not isolated to any one age group. And over the course of COVID, it is only worsening. The American Psychological Association in 2022 did a survey of over 300,000 professionals across multiple disciplines, and they found that 44% of them reported physical exhaustion over the course of a job within the last month due to work-related stress. And that number is up 38% since 2019. If you look specifically at what I would call service or helping-related industries, such as the medical field, food service, anything that is very customer-facing, those numbers can get as high as 80%. 80% of people feeling increased burnout, increased physical fatigue because of the course of their job. And that is related specifically to their profession, but the point is, burnout is prevalent. And over the course of COVID, burnout is becoming even more prevalent. Now, I want to zero in on managing DM burnout, particularly for those who are committed to a long-term game, people who don't get to play. Yes, go ahead. Sure, sorry about that. Is that better? Okay, thank you. And if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, please do feel free to raise your hand. Happy to stop, and I've got some time at the end as well for some Q&A. Particularly for those who are running a longer-term tabletop RPG campaign, or for DMs who do not get to play very often, burnout can be a when, not an if. My goal today is to help you start to understand that process of recognizing the signs of your burnout, of helping you mitigate them and manage them in the long term. Because when we're talking about something like this, when we're talking about burnout, feelings of physical and mental exhaustion, it is a cycle. It's important to think of it as a cycle. Sometimes it might be easier to manage, sometimes it might be more difficult to manage. And building that awareness of your feelings and your behaviors when you're feeling burnt out is the first step to helping mitigate them. So a little story time. How many of us were running campaigns at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic? Raise a hand, a lot of people, yeah. So for me, I just moved to a new place, and a bunch of my group had moved across the country. So playing in person at the table, as we had done for like 4 or 5 years, wasn't really an option anymore. We had to take our game online. We did not account for the fact that a couple of us were on the East Coast, a couple of us were Central, a couple of us were Pacific. So here I am, running games of D&D. It's 11:30, midnight on like a Tuesday night because, hey, we keep the same night, same time, move it back because people are in different time zones. What ultimately was happening was that I was half asleep running games of D&D. It was not as enjoyable for me. These are people whose, my group, my players, were in situations where their lives were different, their availability was different, they had kids, they were also playing at like 9, 10, 11 at night, and I got burnt out on it. I wasn't getting that same sort of face-to-face time, I wasn't getting that feedback from being in the same room with people whose sense of humor I really love, who I enjoy playing the game with, people who I've been playing with for years and had these formative D&D experiences with, even playing with them, I was still getting burnt out. I almost stopped running the game. We were about halfway through Rime of the Frost Maiden at the time, and it was really hard to keep going. Now, when we're talking about having these late sessions, we're talking about having people who are maybe coming in and out, people who aren't able to commit. That's when the feelings of resentment started to settle in. And it's difficult because you have such a great rapport with these players. Maybe these are people who you've been playing with for a long time. And then someone says at the last second, oh, I got to bail. My kid is not feeling great, I got to bail. And of course, in the back of my head is like, the little voice says, why did you even commit to this session in the first place? Well, now we're only going to have 2 people, so I need to cancel. Oh, I was right in not prepping for this. This is a thought pattern. That's resentment. That is not happy. That's not a sign of a happy relationship or play group. But that's the sign, and that's sort of the red flag moment. And that's when you say, okay, well, there's resentment here. Resentment's not a great way to adapt to stress. What's going on here? Do I need to change something? And what is the source of the resentment? Now, this is a bit more of this is a conceptual model brought up by Nagoski in their book Burnout. Human giver syndrome, and this is, I would say, much more of a societal, we feel this much more as a society where people are divided into classes of human beings versus human givers. And to summarize that, human giver, their obligation is to provide and to help the human beings in their circle express themselves. In other words, I as a giver, and I'm giving up my labor, I'm giving up my emotional labor, I'm giving up my personal boundaries and my needs in some cases to the givers. And this is, I could get derailed a little bit on the implications of this in a more broad sense, but zooming in on D&D, on tabletop role-playing games, whenever you've got a clear demarcation between DMs and players, people who have to do prep and people who don't have to do as much prep necessarily, people who are running the experience for others versus people who are participating in it, those feelings of resentment, those maladaptive, not great way of exerting your energy, not helpful or productive ways of expressing your frustration, those tendencies tend to make themselves more clear when you've got that kind of demarcation. And it is absolutely not necessary to make that demarcation between DMs and players because, as we've just discussed, both sides can get burnt out. Both sides can run low on ideas. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can mitigate that by blurring the line between DMs and players in terms of doing prep and contributing to world building and things like that. What I want to keep coming back to is the idea of personal boundaries. Now, in that definition we were just looking at, one of the reasons, and in the definition of burnout earlier, one of the reasons we sometimes get into this burnt out state is not just because we're doing a lot of work, not just because we've been in the same sort of setting or game rule set for a long time, but also because we're feeling like our personal boundaries are being violated as a DM. That can be problematic player behavior. That can be people not showing up on time. That can be people not feeling as engaged or derailing or purposefully moving things forward at a faster pace because we're online, we're disconnected, we're not picking up the energy in the room. You do not need to give up any of your personal boundaries to be a DM. Full stop. We'll get through maybe some examples of setting personal boundaries and how that's helped me in the past. But that's a really important takeaway. Another source of DM burnout is maximizing. How many people here feel like when they get that new idea for a campaign, they think, oh, wow, this is great. I'm going to want to run this campaign for 2 years. This is going to be my podcast. This is going to be my live stream show. I'm going to buy all the minis. I'm going to do all that. Yeah. You don't have to be ashamed. Yeah. Maximizing is the belief that however you are engaging with this hobby, it is not enough. Not enough prep time. Not enough minis. Not enough terrain. Not enough clout for your game. You know, oh, your panel here got rejected because people don't know your podcast. So, I'm still talking from personal experience, by the way. The pandemic also made this situation a lot worse because now you're not just using all of this free time that we had circa, early 2020 to, you're not just using this free time to pursue new interests and keep yourself sane and functional in a very challenging time, but you are also expected to learn how to make soda bread and bring it to the market. You are expected to build your Instagram following and Instagram clout by doing. Was I really just gonna rag on the guy who does those, this is what you can actually do in 6 seconds of combat GIFs on TikTok? He's so cool. Not gonna rag on that guy. But it's the more the mindset that when you are pursuing any new interest, you need to not just find a way to make it work for you, but you also need to generate value from that. And that is a busted idea. And finally, another common cause of DM burnout is this need for novelty. And this one can also really impact players too. Because when you sit down at a table to run Rime of the Frost Maiden, to run Curse of Strahd, to run whatever your module is, you're likely not just looking at, oh, this is something that is going to go for 6 months, unless you're real dynamos and you play 2 or 3 times a week. You're probably looking at 40, 50, 60 sessions, which for a lot of groups can mean 2 years, 3 years. I've been in the death throes of Frost Maiden for about 9 months now. It happens. The stuff runs for longer than you think it's going to. And that need for novelty really comes in, and it says, I know I'm running Rime of the Frost Maiden right now. That's set in Icewind Dale, Cold North, think The Thing, think I'm totally blanking, and all I can think of are those claymation, Christmas specials with oh my goodness. That kind of thing, but the narwhal wants to kill you. And if you're looking at that session, if you're looking at this campaign, you're me, or you've been running Rime of the Frost Maiden for about 2 years, you say, I know we've been in the frozen north for 3 months in game, but there are ninjas now. Okay? We're introducing new elements to alleviate our boredom. And sometimes that can be okay, sometimes that can be jarring for players. But if you're finding yourself saying, okay, well, I want to introduce new elements purely for the sake of novelty in a jarring way for my players, that can also be a sign that maybe a discussion needs to be had about mixing things up. Mhm. Yeah. So throwing away, you're talking about throwing away game mechanics in World of Warcraft for the sake of changing it up. Hmm. Yeah, and that, I think that the idea there is, and I've been guilty of that too, like introducing new mechanics into a campaign halfway through. Like, oh, I really want to do this homebrew crafting system, even though we're 9 months into this campaign, we have not established it at all so far. Sometimes that can work, sometimes players can be into that, but we're introducing new elements that maybe haven't been thought out super well for the sake of novelty, and that can be a really double-edged sword. Any other thoughts or questions there? Cool. All right. So now that we've reflected on some of the causes of burnout, we've discussed what burnout is, we've all seen that a lot of people here in the room have dealt with situations where their creativity and their engagement is reduced because of burnout. How do we mitigate that going forward? Why don't I stop it there for a second? How do we mitigate it going forward? Give up. Okay, well, panel over. Cool. Oh, wow. Revolutionary. It's what everybody needs to hear. You are allowed to communicate issues with your players. We can go through some examples of how to frame that conversation in a minute, but that's... Yep. Yeah, a structured break. And that can be reducing frequency of sessions. That can be taking a break with the intention to come back. Some good ideas there as well. We'll discuss that in a minute. Anything else? Mm-hmm. There are some amazing systems out there, and if your group is down for it, or if you have a group that's down for it, that'd be really awesome too. So, I'll go ahead and move on. What can we do now to change things up? Going back to my story, when we were having those frequent, every other week, 9 p.m. Eastern to like 11:30, 12 p.m. Eastern online sessions for my group, I was not able to put my energy into it. I was exhausted. I had worked a full day. I was not feeling it. And it took probably the course of about 6 months to have that conversation with people and be like, hey, I'm noticing that people are burnt out after work. They're tired. They're not as engaged in the session. It's late here. Let's move the sessions and let's make them less frequent. Instead of realistically getting to play for an hour and a half every other Tuesday of good, productive time, let's take that and do maybe 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, once or twice a month, maybe. That kind of flexibility, if people are able to do that, if people are able to be flexible with their schedules and to change up that pattern that we get in, that can be a really helpful way of giving you a little bit more space, a little bit more, to change things up a bit. Communicating with players who are not respecting your personal boundaries. What do I mean by personal boundaries? Probably should have mentioned this earlier. Personal boundaries can be around anything. Personal boundaries can be around, hey, I am only going to be able to do this session if my partner can watch our kid. I'm only going to be able to do this session if we do it on Wednesdays, or I'm only going to be able to give my availability when I know my work schedule is for the week. It can be player behavior at the table. It can be not mentioning certain elements of gameplay. It can be people being contentious. It can be people being passive, honestly. Really anything, almost any element of your game. And what I mean by personal boundaries are understanding if something is, any of those elements is impacting your ability to enjoy the game, to be engaged with the game, to feel respected at the table, anything like that. As we've discussed, you do not need to give up your personal boundaries as a DM. You do not need to give up your personal boundaries as a player. Those discussions, those conversations can be difficult to have. Anytime I come here to one of these conventions, people always want some validation, number one, of problematic behavior being problematic and impacting their enjoyment, and that being not great. But they also want to know, how do I have that conversation? And without going too deep on it, I think the most way to have that, the most productive way to have that conversation is to say, hey, outside the session, preferably, saying, hey, this is something that happened, this is something that you did, this is something that I saw or I felt. We're talking I statements here, not trying to avoid accusational you statements. You did this. This is something I saw. And when I saw this, this is how I felt, this is how it impacted me. You may not have noticed that, but I wanted to let you know. Yeah.
I think it's really important to emphasize that you have that talk outside of the session, because it's really an insight. You can be like, haha, play it off in character, and then we won't have to talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, we've played off the problematic language at the table. We say, oh, we're introducing fantasy racism into this campaign now, I guess. You know, oh, yeah. Whatever it is that's making you uncomfortable, tendency is to play it off, avoid tension. Really important thing is to cycle back later, like you said, and say, hey, this thing happened during our session. This is how I felt. What's next here? You know, I think most people, when confronted in that way, are more receptive and willing to change their behavior. Obviously, that doesn't apply everywhere. Obviously, you got some people who are not acting in great faith. The important thing is to state what happened and how it impacted you and try to work for change. And if they don't meet you halfway, then you've made the effort and you can decide whether you need to remove yourself from that situation from there. Another great book that I would really recommend, and this is a classic, it's stereotypical, it's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It is a fantastic book. It is very old school. It's very much meant for sort of 50s, 60s professional environments, but those key tenets of not being accusatory, viewpoint taking, and keeping productive language, those are timeless. Cool. Yeah, so discussing with friends when you feel your players aren't respecting your efforts. Sometimes it can be helpful to have a neutral party outside of your group. It's very difficult to vent necessarily to someone who's in the same group as you. If you're all playing in the same group, for instance, and you think, oh, wow, this person did this thing. It was so inconsiderate. You know, they did something that seriously derailed the campaign. How dare they? At that point, you get into an echo chamber. And then the next time you both are in a group with that person, you're both just staring daggers at them the whole time. You're thinking, oh, wow, what's this person going to do to mess things up this time? That's resentment. That's maladaptive. We want to get away from that. Now, one way to defeat that is to explain to a third party, a neutral third party, maybe they are a friend, a partner, someone outside of the group ideally, who is not personally invested in your campaign and whether or not the murder hobo in your group ran off and, you know, killed your quest giver NPC for the lulz. You know, explaining to them in context so that they get not just what happened, but how you felt about it, because that's what they're going to care. They don't care about, quest giver NPC. They care, oh, my friend is visibly upset about something that happened. That's a really good way of learning how to frame and contextualize your feelings and have those conversations eventually with the murder hobo in the group, honestly. Simplifying your sessions. So one thing, and this is something I want to emphasize to both DMs and players in the room. DMs, it is perfectly okay at the end of your current session to say, hey, everyone, this is what we got through today. These are a few things we could do next time. Are we leaning really strongly towards any one of these? Because I can't prep all of them. And then the group says, okay, well, I want to do, option A. Option B, doesn't get prepped. And if we get to the next session and say, all of a sudden everyone's changed their mind, they've talked in their no DMs Discord chat, that's normal, right? And they've said, no, actually I want to do option B. And you get to the table and you say, okay, well, I as the DM have prepared option A because that's what we discussed last time. Can we do option B next time? I get that you want to do it, I want to do that with you, but I have not prepped it, and option B is going to be garbage if I run it right now, okay? I think it takes a lot of load off of you as the DM. And B, I would really take umbrage with people who wanted to say that's railroading, because we've agreed as a group that we want to do X, and my time as a DM is not infinite to prep. But if you know that what you're going to do next time, it can be really helpful as a DM to limit the amount of effort and the amount of what's really discouraging, which is to prep something, be really excited about it, and then it never gets touched. And we have to, we say, oh, well, we put it in our back pocket for another day, but honestly, that day may or may not come. And as players, I think it's really important to acknowledge that no, your DM is not trying to railroad you when you have that kind of conversation. They're just trying to prep in a way that is within the amount of effort and time that they have to give. And they want to give you the best experience. Doing only the amount of prep which you feel you need. So I wanted to be careful about how I phrase that, because for me, 5 minutes of prep can lead to an okay session. It can lead to an okay, it won't be a great session. It'll be a lot of goofing on NPCs. It'll be a lot of sort of madcap combat or a very basic elementary puzzle. But, 5, 10, 15 minutes can lead to an okay session if I'm in a pinch, if I'm really not feeling sitting there. And there we go. Thank you. Are we joking? There we go. Cool. My advice, if you're not sure how much time you need, is to say to yourself, all right, let's do a little bit of self-reflection. Let's think, next time I go into a session, how much of what I prepped did we actually use? Did we use all of it? Did we use every single bit? Did we really get into the backstory for this NPC? What are my players asking about? What do we use? What am I really glad that I had prepared and ready to roll? And what didn't we use? What kind of questions did my party not ask? Oh, I really thought they were going to ask about the background of this character. I thought they were going to be more thorough in the search of the dungeon. Maybe they just, went through it. Maybe they were meticulous with a 10-foot pole, doing the classic Tomb of Horrors thing. I cannot recommend playing the Tomb of Horrors. It is a difficult dungeon to run, honestly. I will say that. When you stop and think about, okay, what did I use? What did I not use? How much time did I spend prepping the stuff that I didn't use? Can that time be better spent doing something else that's not related to the game? Then you get to have a good idea of how much prep you actually need. And this next one, this is one I really want to draw attention to, because I think this can be a powerful tool. If your group is comfortable with the idea of improvisation, if you are comfortable as a DM with introducing improv elements to your game with not knowing perhaps key elements of what your story is going to be, but rather leaving it up to the party, you can ask players to fill in the gaps. You can say, all right, you all start this session at the gate of the dungeon that we agreed that we would play last week. I prepped it. You're standing at the door. How did you get here? Who sent you here? What were you promised for completing this dungeon, this task? Sometimes the group may not be comfortable doing that. Sometimes they may not want to provide that input. Sometimes they may think in terms of like, oh, well, I'm going to introduce big, grandiose game elements, or some people might deliberately be a little antagonistic by trying to expand on the world too much in their answer. But sometimes you'll have players who are comfortable giving you that kind of input and answering it in an interesting way that you can then use later as a DM. I am standing here at the entrance of this dungeon because I owe money to the local Zentarim crime lord, and I need to find something in here to repay the crime lord before his bounty hunters come and get me. Stuff like that. That's fun.
What do you think of a completely decentralized program? Say everyone takes turns doing the DM.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really need to prep the PC on the story because anyone can take it in whatever direction they want. And the idea that the story will go in the direction that the majority of players want.
Yeah. So how do I feel about the idea of a table where the stories, the DM ship is rotating and people can riff on the story from session to session? I think that sounds like a wonderful dream, my friend. I do kind of, I absolutely love the idea of having rotating DM responsibilities and not being the only DM at the table. I think that's fantastic. I think that's a really great way to run things and keep things fresh. And forever DM syndrome kind of is a thing. And that's, it leads pretty well into one of my last points, which is going to your players and saying, hey, you all might not realize this, but I put a lot of stress on myself running this game, right? Like I put a lot of thought into who these NPCs are, who am I, which characters am I drawing from for inspiration when I'm acting out these characters? You know, where am I going with all your backstories? When am I bringing out those elements in? It's a lot of work. It is a labor of love, and I enjoy doing it for y'all. But oh boy, it's a lot of responsibility, and sometimes I feel tired. I'd appreciate it, number one, if people could just acknowledge the work. And number two, if people felt comfortable with it, if they'd be willing to step up and run a game from time to time so that I'm not always the one with the responsibility of putting on the game for the group. Sometimes people will step up. Sometimes you might get people in the group who are willing to take on that responsibility even just for a couple sessions so you can run a one-shot or whatever. And sometimes it's not going to happen. And when that doesn't happen, when you are changing things up, changing the setting, changing the frequency with which you're playing, when you've had those discussions with your players, and those feelings of burnout aren't going away, that's probably when you need to take a break. Because your options at that point are to keep going and not doing it well and making yourself more stressed out, and making it so that when you do get to the point that you don't think you can bear to do this anymore, that you may not come back, or that it may take you 5-10 years to come back, instead of it taking, a couple months, 6 months. The more you double down on these feelings of exhaustion, of burnout, the more you are going through these repetitive, maladaptive, unproductive thought patterns, the resentment, the smack talking after sessions with people in the group, the echo chambers, the more intense those feelings of burnout are going to be, right? The longer you're going to need after you take a break. What's up?
I've had a play group where the entire group in half fell apart because the DM got super stressed, and well, they informed everybody that they were very stressed about it. No one else wanted to. No one else wanted to let anyone else DM except for that DM.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I had offered to DM, even though I've never actually interested to do it.
Yeah.
I was completely shut down by the rest of all their players.
Yeah.
We don't really, basically that they don't really want to play DD unless it's by that the GM.
Yeah.
Each one of them.
Because that's what they're used to. What if you don't do it the same way that the other DM does it? You know, what if your players aren't? And to summarize what you were saying, what happens when the group is not willing to make the change in DM style, or to potentially even have there be a change in game style and how someone else runs it compared to the normal DM. That's I think it goes without saying. I mean, it's understood that if someone else is going to run the game, that it might be different. But it's important to say that and to be like, hey, I think context is really important there, because of course you've got that one person in the group who is running the game, who has the experience, who has the status, who is seen as the safe place. Like, you know, people are looking out for they're looking out for their experience. They're looking out for their enjoyment of the game. At least that's where you have to assume good intent. People are just concerned that they're, you know, we're going to change the DMs and I'm not going to enjoy this anymore and this is BS. You know, why are you asking me to go through this? Context. Hey, this is why I want to do this. This person's feeling burnt out. I want to step up, give this person a little break, set a time window on it. You know, this is only going to be for 2 months. We can use a different set of characters, a different campaign, if we don't want to mess things up with our current campaign. You know, yeah, it's going to be different. It's going to be different. But different can be good. You know, the only way that your current DM got there is because they sat down at the table and said, hey, let's do this. I want to run a game. And that's all you're doing in that situation, is saying, hey, I see a need here. I want to step up and run this game. Yeah, it might be different. Yeah, I might stumble at some points, but it may also be great. You know, I may also really be good and enjoy doing this, and we may alternate in the future. But yeah, time boxing it, making sure that people don't see their whole game as being at risk. You know, that can be a way to sort of compromise on that. Cool. And that's honestly what I would, time boxing it, coming at things with a plan. That's really how that's how I would really recommend looking at this. We're not stopping forever, you know, and absolutely number one priority here is to have that conversation with your players and say, hey, I don't want to stop the game forever, but here's how I'm feeling. I want to take a break for 3 months. You know, maybe we can meet on Discord and play Jackbox games or something once a month just to keep things going, but I'm not going to be able to run this game for now. I've got this stuff going on. I've got these feelings. Time boxing it.
Something I can think of that would be frustrating from the player's perspective when that happens is when the game gets put on hold, like you're losing out on character progression.
Mhm.
So something I can think of that would mitigate this is, so say you could have a side story run by a separate DM
Mhm.
that has some sort of system that progress in that carries over to the main your main story.
Cool. Yeah, that would be a great idea. So not losing progression in your main game. If you've got something going on the side, maybe you find an item, maybe you introduce characters who are then called back to in the main campaign, that sort of thing. Progression, I like it. Cool. Any other thoughts here? Yeah.
I guess sort of building off that idea, something that I've seen a lot of success with is a flashback. So
Mhm.
if you have an important event that happens way in the past of your game, you want to have a side quest, like for like a little break, doing like a run of that event,
Mhm.
just a few sessions. That way, if everyone dies, it doesn't really matter.
Yep.
It's not super impactful, but it helps like deliver that emotional beat of that
Mhm. Yeah, I love the idea of exploring flashbacks. I love the idea of exploring, weird dream sequences or what if scenarios, anything like that. Can be a really fun way to explore something. I don't know if non-canonical is the right word, but we're having a side scenario. We're making it clear that this is a side scenario. Maybe it's run by a different DM, what have you. But yeah. Any other thoughts? A note on changing things up. I think we brought it up a few times, but when we're feeling restricted by less by maybe behavior at the table or the circumstances around which we're playing, sometimes the boredom can come from the campaign setting itself or from the rule set. This is really where I want to encourage people to change it up. I'm a huge fan of taking a month or 2 months and saying, hey, let's try to meet 3 times in this 2 months. We've got this Frostmaiden session that campaign that we just finished. I don't want to commit to a longer game for a while. Let's just time box things. Every 2 months we're going to have a different setting. Every 2 months we're going to have a different DM. Every 2 months we're going to have a different set of characters. We're going to play 2 or 3 sessions in each of those little arcs, and we're going to change it up. We're going to bring new ideas. We're not going to get bogged down because, hey, if this character doesn't work out, if this NPC is not beloved, this campaign's only going to be a couple sessions. All right, we're just getting out some ideas here. My advice for DMs and for players really here is to follow your engagement. That's something you don't necessarily get to do in those longer sessions. If my engagement, if my excitement is around something that does not fit into that Frostmaiden campaign, then I feel like I can't use that idea. I feel limited. I feel like, why am I doing this? Why have I committed to this? If you're running something shorter, you can follow whatever idea or setting or characters you're excited about in the moment. Often that is tied to the media that we're consuming at that particular moment. If you are watching Our Flag Means Death, then okay, yeah, I want to do a pirate campaign now. That sort of idea. What I keep coming back to again is stepping back and making sure that you're not going on autopilot here. Because one of the worst things you can do when you're in this cycle of resentment and physical exhaustion and numbing that we call burnout is to just keep going in that cycle, to not notice those patterns that are leading you towards thoughts of resentment or anger or frustration towards your group. When you stop and when you disrupt those, when you check in and say, why was I running this game again? Why was I getting enjoyment from it? Why did I enjoy the session that I played yesterday? What moments did I enjoy? That's when you can really fight these feelings of burnout. That's when you can reconnect with why you are playing tabletop role-playing games in the first place. Maybe it's combat. Maybe you just enjoy role-playing as goofy NPCs. Maybe you enjoy making those callbacks to the deep lore that you established a year ago in your campaign. Whatever it is, whatever enjoyment you get, whatever inspires that excitement from you and your players, reconnecting with that feeling, and sometimes taking a step out of a longer-term campaign to play a short-term one-shot that really drills down on those ideas can be a great way to boost your excitement, your engagement, and to reduce that burnout. Cool. Bringing it all together. Biggest things, biggest takeaways I can re-emphasize for the group. When you're feeling those feelings that we discussed earlier, that burnout, that lack of inspiration, that dread about doing prep before a session, that's a sign to step back, to say, okay, I'm feeling burnt out. And to reflect on what you enjoyed, what you found tedious, why you're concerned, and make changes that you need going forward for the sake of your game, for the sake of your engagement and your excitement and your players' excitement. All right. That's really about all I had. I really like to bake a good amount of time for questions, which I've failed to do. It is 10:49. Yeah, I wanted to just leave a little bit of room at the end of this for any questions, comments, observations related to the panel, not related to the panel. It's cool. I'm also doing another panel, same time tomorrow, same room, 10 o'clock. That is a dedicated DM question and answer session. Bring your questions about your campaigns. Bring your questions about your problematic players. Spoiler alert, bless you. I'm just going to say to talk to them. It's really that easy and that complicated. But everyone wants to hear it, and I enjoy doing it every time. So if you've got any questions, after this session, tomorrow, 10 a.m., same room. Cool. But yeah, any thoughts or questions now? Yo. Thanks, everybody. And, yeah. Yep. Yeah, so when I moved my game online, did we use cameras or no cameras? It's a mix. Most of the group was using cameras. That was a big concern for me because I knew if I was just staring at a blank screen, I was not going to, my ability to connect with that game was going to tank. I was not going to get anything out of it. Most of the group did use cameras. There were a few people who, there's chaos going on at home between kids and pets and what have you. So they preferred not to, just so it's not like, it didn't seem like they were stepping away every 5 minutes to deal with a situation. I understand that, that's fine. But it was a conversation that I made sure to have before we took things online, and my players were pretty receptive of that. Cool. Yes?
I was wondering if you had some thoughts about dealing with kind of like the opposite player resentment, because like I have a group at home that I feel like has kind of put me on a pedestal as a GM, and they have like this intense love of my world building and the character and the NPCs I've made for them, and so now I'm feeling this pressure to kind of live up to the expectations every time I prep for them, and so I feel like my burnout is a little more related to that and being able to give them what they want and need, and whether or not I can actually do that.
Yeah. So replicating the success you've had in the past of, creating the characters and the world and all that your players have enjoyed, and putting pressure on yourself to keep delivering to that degree. Does that sum it up pretty well? Cool. My immediate instinct would be to open the kimono and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. Maybe you have more idea of what you're doing than I do. I don't. And I was not kidding when I said 5, 10, 15 minutes of prep for me. I don't know if it's different for you. Do you tend to do more prep?
I feel like my prep is pretty passive in terms of like I have a history of just like having ideas come to me, and then I just like carry it for a few months until it's time to like introduce
Oh yeah,
it at the end of the game.
you've had this idea in your back pocket, and now it's okay. Well, yeah, I want to introduce this, and that's worked.
To an extent.
Good job. Good job. I mean, all I can really do here, and I think the most productive thing I can do here is invert that just reframe that thought pattern. Maybe the maladaptive, I keep using this word, maladaptive means to act in a way that is counter to you doing, having productive or helpful or self-supportive, self-caring thoughts. So it is maladaptive versus, I guess adaptive. I don't know. I'm not a healthcare professional. But yeah, reframing that. And, the maladaptive thing is to say, my players have enjoyed everything I've done. If I don't do the exact same kind of prep every single time, then they're not going to enjoy it, and they're going to hate it, and they're going to leave, and they're going to say I'm not a good DM. But we can reframe that, right? We can say, hold on, my players have enjoyed everything I've done. I'm doing a really good job. And, maybe I'm going to have off days. Everyone has off days. But in general, whatever I'm bringing, whatever ideas I'm bringing to the table, they're really enjoying that, and they're having a good time, and they keep coming back, and they keep saying thank you at the end of sessions, and talking in the Discord chat and speculating about who's going to betray them, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think we owe it to ourselves to not be quite so hard and demanding of ourselves. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I'll get to you in a second. You back there, did you have your hand up earlier?
Well, I had a comment about the cameras thing. I had two groups. One was really, well, I had action cam for this group, but one is really, we all play online. One group is like really responsive, and so like the conversation really flows. And in that sense, I feel like cameras aren't as necessary because you're not waiting for that feedback. And then I have this other group, and I'm a new DM. This is the first time I've been DMing, and this group that I've known since college and been playing with them for a very long time. I've been really struggling where I'm like narrating a scenario and then it's crickets, and I'm just like, did you guys hear me? Is my mic on?
Yeah.
And so that group I'm considering, I'm glad I came here because I'm considering like, we were playing like weekly or bi-weekly and on breaks. Like maybe I need to switch to, let's do like a monthly in-person, because we can't play in person.
Yeah.
Monthly in-person, longer sessions, because that way I'm like, I need visual feedback from
Yeah.
you guys, and you might not be able to turn on your camera for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I think like, depending on your group, it may or, you might find you may or may not need the camera depending on how much other feedback you get.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a few things in there. Number one, I love how you phrased it. I need feedback from you. That isn't, you all are being quiet. Why aren't you giving me feedback? I need this. This is what I need. We're talking about me. We're talking about my needs. That's great. Great way to frame that conversation. I don't think you need me to tell you that it's not a double standard if you don't need cameras with one group and you do need a camera with another group. I don't think you're going about it from the angle of taking them to task. Like, I'm punishing you. Like, I'm enabling a keyboard tracker, so that you're not on Reddit when we're playing and all this, because that's like, oh boy. I'm also into management, talking about management and management consulting and all that. And number one way to make people check out is to make them feel as if you are punishing them for something, because they're not doing anything wrong in their mind. They are chiming in when they feel like they've got an idea, guaranteed. Like they are. They don't understand necessarily that any response is good. Any energy they bring to the table that's not. We'll put an asterisk on that. Any asterisk energy they bring to the table is going to be productive, and you can run with it. They may not necessarily feel that level of comfort with you, and I think turning on cameras, saying, "Hey, I feel the need to connect with you." I think that's fine. It's doable, and maybe that gets you to where you need to be. Maybe you do need to take those breaks that you were mentioning. The first step is to have that conversation, honestly.
I think that like if we were all sitting around on a table together, those pauses, waiting for feedback would not be as mentally jarring.
Yeah.
You'd all be kind of getting to feel that energy, but when you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, it's like really mentally jarring.
Yes. That you're literally speaking into a void. Yeah. Yeah. And I know we're coming up on time. We had a few more questions, so I'm going to get through those really quick. I say you and then you.
You ever feel like when you run through an initiative, particularly, like you have to kind of wrestle with the system at times, and you get like too off base from what it's built for? You know what I mean?
I typically do what I want to do almost all the time, and I don't let it bother me. Fifth edition, I feel like has the problem that people are trying to do things with it that it's not really built to do. I don't know if that's specifically your question about the limitations of fifth edition, but in short, do you like find yourself struggling with like making homebrew or feeling like you have to make homebrew?
I've just gone back to basics recently. I found that solved a lot of my problems.
Yeah.
The amount of time it takes to get everything ready, particularly.
Yeah, totally. You go back to basics, find that minimum level of prep, and do it. And I think we've got one more minute. I'm not sure if anything else is in here afterwards. What's up?
So I guess just commenting on your, I have the same thing with my group, and what I found also helps is
Yep.
Like I introduced a mass combat system to one of my campaigns years ago, and we played it like 3 or 4 times. And I asked my players, "Hey, did you enjoy that?" And they were like, "Nope,
No.
not at all."
No, it never works.
Neither
No.
did I. Let's stop doing that.
Mass combat is always roll a handful of d6s and pray to Jesus. One more.
So I started sharing a few months ago the extreme resentment and massive burnout. How do you get back after like feeling like your players hate you and don't want to be with them?
Those are some really intense feelings, first off. The dealing with the idea of wondering whether your players hate you, wondering whether your players want to play in your group after taking a break. Like, is that the, are you feeling like those kinds of feelings?
When I stopped doing yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's hard. I mean, number one, big credit to you. First off, that's not easy to say I'm worried about people not wanting to play in my games anymore. I'm going to tell you to have the conversation when you're ready to have that conversation. And that conversation can be, hey, I've been running a game for you for a while. Maybe you had the conversation if you stopped the game of like, maybe you had the conversation when you stopped playing of like, hey, I'm feeling really burnt out. I don't know if I can run with this anymore. And I don't know when I'm going to be able to run with this again. Maybe you had that conversation, maybe you didn't. It's always better to have that conversation 6 months after the fact than to never have that conversation at all. And again, when you're having that talk, if you're like, the only way to get past the idea of maybe my players don't want to play in this group anymore is to have a conversation and to be okay with it coming out that, yeah, maybe they don't want to play in your group anymore. And they have that right. I don't think what I really don't want is for you to leave that conversation thinking I'm never going to run a game of D&D again, or nobody's ever going to want to play in my game of D&D again, because that's not true. And I don't know if you're telling yourself that or not, but having that conversation, and I'm running a little over, but having that conversation, being ready for the result, and being just honest and focusing on I statements. I felt burnt out. I needed a break. I'd like to start again if you want to. I think that's the first step. Is that helpful? Cool. And I'm sorry I've gone over. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your questions. I hope you all have a good day.